Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Traceability, Where We Are and What's Next, brought to you by the FPSA's Packaging Network. The FPSA's Packaging Network seeks to raise awareness of the current state of primary and secondary packaging within the food and beverage industries. The priorities are sustainability, traceability, and barriers to packaging. If you're interested in joining the network, please go to fpsa.org/networks to join today. If you have any questions about this network or any of the other networks, please contact Elena Sierra. My name is Glenn Godino, and I'm the group publisher for BNP Media's Packaging Group. I'm a proud member of the FPSA's Packaging Network and will be serving as your host and panel moderator for today's webinar. Today's discussion is to discuss traceability from the customer's perspective. Traceability in manufacturing processes involves collecting and managing information regarding what has been done in the manufacturing process, from acceptance of raw materials and parts to shipments of products. Specifically for the food and beverage industries, we can trace and track food and food ingredients through the supply chain to have a clear transparency through all stages of production, processing, and distribution. Our panel is comprised of a food manufacturer, a policy expert, and a paper and packaging solution OEM. Over the past few weeks, we've received a wide range of questions on traceability and the impact it has on customers, companies, sustainability initiatives, its legal requirements now and into the future, the role of technology, roadblocks to implementation, and trends in the marketplace. I would now like to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Darryl?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Darryl Riley. I'm the SVP of Quality, Food Safety, and R&D at the Hostess brand. I've been in industry for a little over 30 years. I've spent most of my career at Kraft Foods, about 19 years there, and then about 10 years at the Kellogg Company, and I've been with Hostess for about 5 years. I've had the opportunity to lead global quality organizations in several of those areas, and really am excited to be here to talk about some experiences, some opportunities, and address any questions that people have going forward. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Rasma?
Thank you. Welcome. My name is Rasma Zvaners, and I am the Vice President of Regulatory and Technical Services for the American Bakers Association. We represent the baking sector, commercial, both allied supplier members as well as baking companies. In my role at the American Bakers Association, I serve as a liaison for our Food Technical Regulatory Affairs group that deals primarily with FDA and USDA, and then I also serve as liaison with our Energy and Environment group that primarily deals with some of the state permitting issues and the Environmental Protection Agency. In those roles, we take an opportunity to help our members guide and understand their obligations from the regulatory perspective, and try to provide opportunities for them to also filter their concerns and comments back into the different agencies with respect to regulatory frameworks. I appreciate the opportunity this afternoon.
Thank you. John?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm John Dwyer. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for WestRock. WestRock is one of the largest packaging companies globally. We're a fiber-based company very focused on sustainability, e-commerce, and digital platforms. I work in our enterprise group, work across all of the different divisions of WestRock, and I'm very focused on digital solutions. My background is really all packaging over the course of my career. I spent about the past 12 years prior to this role in the transaction card industry, working closely with card issuers like Visa, MasterCard, and American Express. So I came out of a world most recently where everything is serialized, everything has its own unique identity, and I'm working with a team at WestRock to instrument some of those same types of solutions on packaging to make products easier to identify and to trace.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for joining us. The way I'd like to handle the discussion is just that, an open discussion. A number of the questions that I'll be presenting you with is meant to be answered. You come from pretty diverse backgrounds, so feel free to answer, and there's no time limit as to how long it takes you to answer a question, so feel free to give us some examples and share your experience. The first question is, in each of your own opinion, what is traceability's impact on today's consumers, and vice versa? How do consumers impact traceability?
What was the last part of the question? How do consumers, I'm sorry?
And how do consumers impact traceability?
I'm glad to take a shot at that, if I might. So I think I think traceability is becoming more and more table stakes for consumers, right? I think consumers' expectations are much higher than they have been in the past, and it's linked to brand trust, to the way that they interact with products and with branded companies. And the expectation is that there's this transparency. The Internet of Things and World Wide Web has made access to data and information about everything that we do really available at our fingertips. And I think that product traceability is linked to that directly. Consumers expect to be able to know if a product was, if it's non-GMO, and to find that out relatively easily. Were animals involved in testing, like all of the things that happen around our world today are pretty readily available. And so I think there's a level of transparency is required by brands to make sure that the consumers get the information that they want. I think of as an example, a couple of years ago, when Hershey had the issue where the tips of the Hershey Kisses were broken. And this happened in the fall when people were making holiday cookies. And there was really this kind of social media uproar that somehow consumers were being taken advantage of, that maybe there was less chocolate being delivered, that they weren't able to make treats that were aesthetically pleasing. And it was a great example when you talk about consumers, is that social media now is, I've heard the statistic that it takes 40 positive reviews to counteract one negative review. So it raises the stakes in terms of transparency, provenance, just availability of information. And I think there's just a different expectation of consumers today in terms of what they can find out about the products that they interact with.
Darryl, you were going to say something. Did you want to add to that or give us your thoughts?
Yeah, that was a good perspective from John. I guess the way I would start is I would say there's sort of a lot of people that are in the value chain as it relates to supplying products or services to consumers. And I think everyone has raised their awareness and has raised their understanding of how we are all accountable and responsible. It starts with the suppliers in terms of their ability to also perform trace, one step forward, one step back. It extends to then going into brokers or sellers, to where many of them, the supply chains are actually very complex today. And those brokers may sell to exporters, so those exporters may sell to importers. You may go through other brokers. You may go through eventually, there may be 10 steps before it actually reaches a manufacturer. And the challenge with understanding how to understand transparency when you have different IT systems, you have different government regulations, et cetera, becomes very challenging. And I think, to John's point, consumers don't actually understand that, because what they expect is that when you have an issue, an opportunity, they expect for you to be able to turn it around within hours. And the reality of it is that we need to really investigate. We need to make sure that we don't rush to judgment, but we need to make sure that we rush to ensure that the information that we're providing is actually clear. There have been so many instances when people have rushed to do something and then it was incorrect. And so you have to have that balance of accuracy and speed. And that's one of the things that I think is extremely important as it relates to consumers. It's important to communicate, but you also want to make sure that you have speed. You make sure that your accuracy is right and that you actually communicate clearly to them. They understand that, there are lots and lots of companies. In fact, I think the recent statistic, there's probably, upwards of 39,000 food manufacturers in the United States. Each one of them are in different facets of development. Some people have complete IT systems where they can track via barcodes from the raw material all the way through to their consumers or their customers. Other people are in paper, right? And the paper-based systems is unfortunately where most of the industry is. We're trying to advance, so you hear things like blockchain and 2D codes, but that's not where most of the industry is. We want to learn, we want to accelerate our opportunity, and then we want to start to convert stuff over to that, what we call the digital transformation, which will help things enable consumers and customers to be more understanding, and for them to, I think to what John said, to make sure that their trust, we increase the trust associated with that. We need to earn consumers' trust all the time, and it doesn't take much in order to destroy that trust. We've seen that happen on many occasions, and so it is really important that we really look at our value chains that extend back to the suppliers all the way through to our consumers. In my past, when I was leading an organization that happened to be a cereal organization, there was an ingredient that was a fruit ingredient in it, and we wanted to go back and find out where it was grown. Well, lo and behold, it brought me back to a small village in China where the actual fruit was grown. And I have to tell you, it was an amazing experience to see how that ingredient made it all the way through to our factory. It was astonishing that it went through that many changes. And that's what the global supply chain is really faced with, a new world. We're looking at economics, we're looking at opportunity, and we want to make sure that we're supplying our consumers with, obviously safe products first and foremost, but ones that they can afford economically. And so you have to think very completely about how do you do that? How do you really ensure that? But it's really the global supply chain is it's once you open up the box, you really learn about how complicated things are, and you take that going forward in order to try to satisfy our consumers and customers. Thank you.
That's great. Rasma, anything you'd like to add to that, or your thoughts?
Sure. I think, between John and Darryl, they set up a nice little segue. One of the things that we're dealing with right now with respect to traceability is the FDA's proposal on that. And Darryl, to the points that you made, I think there's an underappreciation of how complex the food supply truly is. And when we've been, to date, the requirement has been to go one step forward and one step back for purposes of a recall. Or if there are problems with a product. But I think, our concerns are that under all of the rules that have come out from the Food Safety Modernization Act, there's always been this element of flexibility and the understanding that one size does not fit all across the food sector. And even looking at our baking companies that are our members, I have a wide array of how they're doing their systems for purposes of traceability, everything from paper to everything to technology, but systems that don't easily integrate. So I think that when you look at that regulatory overlay on it, needs to be something that's streamlined and simple instead of creating a duplicative process and additional record keeping that in the end is not going to lead to safer food.
Is there a delay in lag time with an entrepreneurial brand versus a large established CPG brand? when it comes through regulations and getting it through, or are they all given the same amount of time and to process their requests and work things through?
From a regulatory perspective?
From a regulatory perspective, yes.
Well, I think they all have the same compliance deadlines that they need to meet, but I do think that, there are some that are being more aggressive in pursuing moving towards a digital technology. I think we all recognize that that is where we are headed. I think for purposes of sustainability and also just the global economy, that we are so linked and people want to know information far more quickly now than they have before. But in order to do that, I feel we need to set that level playing field and find what works for everyone as we start moving forward. So I think when I look at sort of the FDA's perspective, they have, the traceability rule, which is part of their mandate under the Food Safety Modernization Act. But then their new era of food safety proposal that is moving forward sort of we're at the 10-year mark of. So I think it's an opportunity for everyone to look forward and think about how we can do things better and how we can improve upon what we have.
Great. Would anybody else like to add any other thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, just a slight build on what Rasma had. So many of us have been part of this journey for a long time. So back in 2008, right before FSMA, the FDA launched something called the FDA Food Defense Plan. And there were 3 component pieces of it that really helped build where we are today. The first one was called prevention, which is really where we're trying to expend most of our time. The second one was called intervention. And then the third was response. And the question that you asked was around the response. And part of that is, I think the FDA and USDA, they've advanced their expectations. You have the food registry where you have to report stuff within a certain time frame. And everybody sort of has to cater to that if you are under the clause of being an FDA or USDA facility. So everybody abides by that. The challenge is information. How quickly can you gather that information in order to do things? And so most companies have what's known as, mock recalls, or they do, trace exercises in order to time themselves in order to see whether or not they're in compliance. And, if they're not in compliance, they work to figure out, do they need to automate something, or do they need to add headcount or whatever it is in order to be able to satisfy those requirements. But, we've been in this journey for, as Rajan, it's a little over a dozen years. The expectation is set even higher, so the bar keeps on going up as technology advances. There's been some recent seminars and talks from the FDA, from Frank Kianis and his team, just in terms of, the expectations on traceability. Recently they've put in new additional considerations for a certain group of products that are mainly both in the fruit and fresh vegetable sectors in terms of traceability. Some of us benefit from processed food where we have boxes or something. John knows this. We can print stuff on codes and boxes and corrugate and film. What happens when you have green pepper? What happens when you have lettuce? Like, what are you going to print in those, right? And so those are the things where it challenges your thinking. Like, am I going to buy something like a stalk of lettuce that I see a bunch of stuff written on? Like, I don't know. So you have to attack these a little bit differently. And so I think the challenge in the industry is just immense. And we're blessed to have a lot of talented and really smart people that tend to figure these things out. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time to do that.
That's a great point. And each of you mentioned technology versus paper. As far as implementation, if someone of the 30-some thousand food manufacturers that there are, how many of those, or do we have an idea of how many of those have an existing platform or are still a long ways away from actually implementing a traceability serialization program? And are there challenges that stick out more than others that people should be aware of if they're looking to implement something?
Yeah, that's a tough nut to answer. I think each one of us will have different experiences. I'm actually interested to hear John's, because one of the things that FSMA brought into it, which was very different prior, is packaging. So we have to be as investigative of our packaging suppliers as we do our ingredient suppliers. And in the past, that really never was what we focused in on as an industry. We focused in on the ingredients. And so that has taken on new challenges. But, each of us have supplier programs. And I've been, helping to lead some of that. And we ask the questions. I think it was Rasma said, you go one step forward and one step backward. And you ask your suppliers, what are the list of questions? Are they following all the rules associated with FSMA? You visit them, you discuss it with them, you build a rapport because you want to make sure that, if something does happen, they're giving you a call. There have been so many recalls that have happened that, manufacturers read about them on the news because the suppliers don't tell them. And so you never want to be in that position, although you every now and then you find yourself in that one. So I think it's a great question, Glenn. I'd be curious to get other people's perspective.
Yeah, I think the piece that I'll add to that is Darryl, I completely agree. And I think, from dealing, with our members who have had to go through recalls, I think one of the frustrations is to quickly turn around some of that information. It's not that they don't have it, but it's in different places, and sometimes those pieces don't communicate with one another very easily. For example, one of the concerns that we raised with FDA with the traceability proposal was this 24-hour searchable spreadsheet, to have that ready and available. And, our recommendation is, we need additional time, or can give you what we have and kind of keep it as an evergreen document as you do a regular recall, because sometimes those things just don't communicate easily with one another.
So Rasma, you kind of brought this up twice already, and I think it bears repeating maybe a third time, is around interoperability. The trap that you can fall into when you think about solutions for traceability is solving your own problem, right? And not thinking necessarily about how does that relate to the industry or other players in the industry. And so we've been very focused on seeking out IoT provider platforms that act as middleware that make it very easy to ingest data and push it to ERP systems, to blockchain, to there isn't one solution, and so I think it's really important to think about interoperability as a way, because your product is oftentimes not standalone, right? There are products that are impacted, there are ingredients that impact multiple products, and the other point that Darryl, you brought up around packaging. It's kind of interesting because when you think of traceability and where it lives today, pharmaceutical is probably an area where there's quite a bit of traceability occurring. And in the pharma industry, if you take a look at the way that those programs are instrumented, they really are serializing packaging, not the product itself. Darryl, to your point, a head of lettuce with jet printing on it might not be very appealing. So there's a lot to be done with, if you think of a blockchain, which is a distributed ledger, the ability to capture data at various phases in the manufacturing, and there's the from ingredient up to the point of manufacture, then there's manufacture to the point of distribution, and then ultimately it gets to the consumer. And again, the consumer's voice, as we've seen over the last couple of years, has gotten louder and louder and louder. And the loudest voices tend to get the most attention. So I think it's really important when you think about traceability. First of all, if you're not doing anything today, do something, right? There are ways to get into, the one step forward, one step back. It can be packaging based, it can be ingredient based, but there are ways to begin the traceability journey that do not have to be, completely overwhelming. That being said, I would also add, start the journey with the end in mind. If you have an idea where you want to go or where the industry is going, you can think about, do I need to mark each product? Do I need to mark product by the case, by the pallet? We think of it from an economic value perspective. Am I going to, realistically in a recall, what's the lowest economic value that you would recall? Is it an individual unit of product? Is it a case? Is it a pallet? And then you can start building a traceability program around that to make sure that you're addressing the problem as it relates to your products. And we work with IoT providers. We manufacture packaging that we use, sensors like RFID and BLE and NFC that we use for traceability. You can mark products individually with serialization, as well as equipment to do all those things. So there's a lot of options. And I would say, coming out of a world where everything was serialized, that I envision a much broader world when you think of 4,000 or 4 trillion consumer goods, that many of those things over the course of the next few years will be serialized with their own identity to instrument consumer engagement, product provenance, traceability. All of those things will become increasingly important in a connected world. Thank you.
Thank you. Recalls, that seems to be a recurring thought and topic that has come up. I'm curious, from the baking industry versus other industries, are there things that people need to be aware of? Are there things that people have to, how is it differ from industry to industry, certainly, but from a recall standpoint, what are some things that people need to be aware of that maybe they didn't think of, or items that they didn't think about to prevent recalls from happening?
So I think the way that products are distributed can have a big impact on recall. We're actually working with a customer today who distributes their product through food service distributors. And so they're one step away from their end use customer. They're utilizing a clever strategy, which is a rewards program that the end use customers can enter into and scan and log those product in to gain rewards directly from the manufacturer. That does a couple things for them, because those packages are linked to lots and batches, and so there's manufacturing information that's embedded, that when you use your mobile device to scan those cases and enter them into a loyalty program, you now know specifically where product is. So instead of a very general recall to say, hey, look for this product and these batch numbers and these locations, the reason why recalls are so broadly distributed for the most part is that it's difficult to get directly to where that product ended up. And so I think there's some interesting, clever ways that you can kind of remove the barriers that Darryl, as you mentioned, supply chains are complex. It's hard to figure out how your product gets to the consumer. But I think that in this day of enabled consumers who use mobile devices and have ways to interact with products, you can also crowdsource checking in with product to make sure you know where it is ultimately, that can make recalls much easier as one idea.
Yeah, I think to John's point, one of the frustrations that we often have is because of the complexity of the supply chain. You may have a baker that is sending product directly to the retailer. So if there's a reason for a recall, it's very easy to work through the retailer and find out and isolate and move forward. I think where even tech-enabled technology may help is where you have a baker sending to a distributor who then changes the log codes to their system and then pushes that out to, say, 400 additional retail locations. And that's where some of our bakers have had challenges in trying to, once you go beyond that one step, how do you then get the information that you need so that you can be responsive in the situation of a recall?
Interesting. Darryl, any thoughts to add to that, or?
I mean, you open up a can of worms when you talk about recalls, because it's a really challenging thing for a global company, because what we tend to think of our domestic, and sometimes we think of our state. But when you're talking about products that now get distributed through, DoorDash or Amazon, and they're to consumers in 2 days with Prime, you have now changed the entire dynamics of the food industry. And it goes back to, I don't think people understand how complex it is, but in the time frame it takes for me to make a product, and I can put it on a truck, and it can go to the retailer, it can go directly to your home. So you're already consuming something by the time half of this element takes place. And then number two is the industry is challenged because everybody uses Best By dates or barcode dates, and everybody has a different vernacular in terms of the codes, and can you read it because it's white on white is printed or black on black. We got these weird codes that we put on because we don't want people to know what we're doing with each other. It just becomes very complex. And I actually selfishly, on the manufacturer side, I applaud a lot of the manufacturers for their diligence in terms of how they really raise the bar and go after really ensuring that they have real good systems in place in order to protect the consumer, protect themselves. And so I've been fortunate to be part of a couple large organizations, and those large organizations, generally everybody wants to do the right thing, and it's a how question. How do you do this in a manner that allows you to be successful and allows you to, continually progress? Are there some bad apples in the organization? That's with everything we do. And FSMA wasn't written for all the big companies that do things right. It was written for the companies that don't, right? And they're really clever about working around other things. And so trust me, they're working around FSMA in different ways. And the beauty of our industry now is we're much more interconnected. And so we hear about things. I'm sure Rasma, she has like so many bakeries that are part of the organization. So she hears about things. And I think that's what changes where we are today versus where we were 20 years ago.
Does privacy come into play in anything here? Are people reluctant to share information because of privacy laws or regulations, or is that not part of this?
I think, through the work of the trade association, the technical group that I lead it's never a competitive environment. I mean, we are all looking to do things better for purposes of food safety. And I think of it more as a collaboration, both with the small, the medium, and the large size companies to just make good decisions and provide an opportunity to do things better. And we have very strict rules about, antitrust and what you can't talk about. But I've never, in all my years, even prior to working with the Baking Association, I was with the chemical sector. And, when you look at regulations, you're looking to be the best that you can and to bring along the industry. And for us, privacy has never really been an issue in my role.
I don't see privacy as a huge issue when we think about traceability and recall. But I will just circle back on this notion that acting, I think Darryl and Rasma brought this up a couple times, the industry acting together with standards, with interacting interoperability, with the understanding of what the common goals are is really important, because none of this can happen in a vacuum. And so where we see customers that we try to help make mistakes is around developing solutions that maybe they only understand or only speak their internal language. I think thinking more about industry standards and working together is much more effective when you think about traceability solutions, because again, it is a complex supply chain of suppliers, and the more that we all speak together in a common language, the more effective we can be around traceability.
I'll give a story, Glenn, it goes back probably about 12 or 13 years. It was my first job leading a global quality company, global quality for a company. And back then we had a GMA, which was one of the trade associations for food. And we had a group that was called WestRock, which was the Scientific Regulatory Affairs Committee that I sat on. And obviously you had all your competitors on there, and the discussion centered around regulation and food safety. And the group of us that were together got to be fairly close, and would share non-competitive stuff. But in terms of, I think what John said, like, how do you make your industry better? And Rasma said, like, this isn't about antitrust. It's about how do we protect our categories, our food. And so while I was new at it, I thought it was really interesting. Well, lo and behold, some months later, we would have our meetings. I went through what was my first major recall. And I remember sitting in my office and feeling that I had let the company down and the world down. And I was feeling like sorry for myself, and the phone rang. And I picked up the phone, and it was one of my colleagues from SRAC, from my major competitor. And her response was, "Hey, I saw what happened. I just wanted to call you and see how you were doing, and just give you support." And to me, that's how I would answer the question. We really aren't competitive, and I'll always remember that call, because it showed me that this is bigger than one individual company. It's a matter of us trying to protect consumers, and we all need to help each other as this continues. So I thought I'd share that.
It's a great story.
Yeah, good story. Great story. The questions continue to come in. I apologize. I'm reading off of my iPad here. A question from one of the attendees is, how are companies able to include raw ingredients into their serialization programs? For example, dividing up lettuce or tracking the tracking of raw ingredients when they are packaged. Anybody want to take a swing at that one?
So it's complicated. It certainly can be done. I think the means are available today. There are IoT platforms that are not, you don't have to go all the way to a food truck blockchain to be able to do that. But when you think about serialization or QR code or whatever is on the outside of the package, all that is a physical link to something that exists in the cloud. We talk about a digital twin, right? So you have a physical product, and then the code is a digital link or to that, whatever that manifestation is, and that connects you to databases. So once you have the ability to create connected databases, the ingredient suppliers can validate what their information is, and honestly, that can be captured. That could be a handwritten manifest that's captured, right? That can be stored in the cloud. That can then link to where was that product processed? How was it packaged? What was the environment? It really comes down to what are the key pieces of data that you want to capture, right? And where do you do that in the chain? Who owns each of those key pieces of data? And once you do that, linking that back to some type of serialization on the package, that's just, there's IT heavy lifting there for sure, but you're just linking data together, and the product is, when I think of, we talk about smart packaging, and I think of 4 things that a product should be able to tell a consumer about itself. It should be able to say, what am I, right? What is the provenance? What are my ingredients? Where did I come from? So where was it manufactured? How how did that process occur? How do you use me effectively? Is it something that's part of a meal solution, or that you eat independently, or some other type of product? And then what do you do with this product when it's depleted? How do you recycle it? How do you reuse it? How does it become part of a circular economy? So if you think about your product in those 4 buckets, I think those are questions that consumers are interested in. And as you aggregate that information, you can link that all to whatever type of coding. As you mentioned, there's all types of codes and methodologies and ways to serialize around a product, but all of that data can be linked together to provide a full picture of where that product came from.
Would anybody else like to contribute a little to the answer? Or? Okay. Thank you, John. We've got another question that's come in. It is, what are your thoughts on the responsibility of food equipment suppliers in regards to traceability, serialization, and fraud protection?
Food equipment. Yeah, that's you said food equipment suppliers?
Equipment suppliers, yes.
I'm not sure how to start that one. I've not thought about food equipment in the realm of what I've done as traceability. I've been more focused in their hygienic design and their ability to help support quick cleaning and those sort of things. So I don't have any experience or a good response on that.
Okay. I agree with Darryl, because most of what we look at is, again, from the, does it meet standards, and is it easy to clean, and looking at it from a food safety perspective.
I think the question may center around 3A, like for dairy. But I've been out of dairy for a long time, so that it may occupy more of that arena than I guess most of the other groups, because we don't have those standards in other areas.
Yeah, I think if from a packaging machinery perspective, I'm seeing more connected packaging platforms where you have machinery that does self-diagnostics and can report back on what temperature was it operating at. Is the just if you look at obviously machine automation, and you think about traceability and marking products in a way, you are automating. I don't know, Rasma, if you said it earlier, around kind of these handwritten processes that occur within factories, manufacturing locations. So equipment platforms can be a source of data, I guess is one way to look at it. And again, it's another point where if you can capture that data and aggregate it and store it. I see that happening a lot with RFID, where you have a product that moves into cold storage, and when that pallet of product moves from location to location, how long, what temperature it was in, how long it was stored in that location, how long it was outside of cold storage, maybe when it's waiting to be loaded into a truck. That's the kind of machinery automation that I think about that can help aggregate additional data about product and contribute to this chain or unique fingerprint about a product. I'm not sure that that's exactly where the question was going, but just maybe contextually, smarter machinery as can record information about what it's doing. That can be part of a smart supply chain as well.
Thank you. The next question, we'll start with Rasma. How do you think traceability will evolve in the next 5 to 10 years?
So actually, I think there are a lot of opportunities. I think the first thing we need to do is get through the traceability proposal and final rule and see where FDA is with that. It's their last mandate under the Food Safety Modernization Act under Section 204. That said, with the fact that technology is moving so quickly, I think in the past year, we all learned to quickly readjust to different delivery mechanisms for food, for products, for other things. As we were dealing, with the pandemic situation, I think there are elements of that will very much play into advancing more technology with traceability moving into the future. I'm excited to see what opportunities there may be, for the broader food sector under the FDA blueprint for new era of smarter food safety. For example, just this week, they released a request to vendors who have traceability technologies that may be valuable for the food sector to submit their information in a 30-day window, and then they're sort of going to do best of class and share that information. So I think there are opportunities in the future for collaboration. Technology is an element of that, and it's an opportunity for us to be better than we are right now.
Thank you. Darryl, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I mean, I'd first start off by saying ditto, because I think Rasma captured it accurately. I think the only add is while we are advancing digital transformation, we also have to be sensitive to the fact that the more we put this on vehicles that are digitizing, we also have to be careful that we don't end up with ransomware that could really impact our chain very differently. So it's different with paying $5,000 to get oil or to get something. It's a huge change if somebody were to do something harmful to our food supply. We have to be really sensitive to the fact that we have been blessed. I mean, nobody has done anything. Well, some people have, but think about your water supply. You think about some of the precious ingredients in terms of wheat and commodities. So we need to be forward thinking, definitely in terms of advancing, moving out of all paper-based record keeping, because sometimes that slows things down. But we also have to bring with that sensitivity just around food safety and security.
John? So I think I agree completely with Rasma and Darryl. I would say two things that I think about a lot. One, and these are statistics that are available, the average company has about 67% accurate visibility in their supply chain at any given time. So the ability to increase that is valuable. The statistic is there's about $1 trillion of food waste globally. And so, taking that together in the supply chain, the ability to improve visibility, to reduce food waste, I think traceability, it solves so many problems for the food industry, both from a consumer side, where Darryl, as you said, transparency equals trust. It's not if traceability becomes the SOP, it's when. And then how does each of us participate in that solution to move the industry in a positive direction to, as Darryl said, to protect the food supply, to protect consumers, to add transparency to the mix, and just make an overall better marketplace for food suppliers.
Right. Well, in closing thoughts here, I want to be cognizant of time. I'd like to go around the panel, and last question would be, takeaways, best practices, things that people to know. If there was one thing that you really wanted the audience to take away from this conversation and just in general when it comes to traceability and food manufacturing, what would that be? What's the takeaway that people should know and understand when it comes to traceability, the importance, the impacts, and so forth? We'll start in reverse order, and I'll put John on the spot here and ask him to lead the closing statements here.
Well, that's a tough question, because I think at the beginning I said there isn't one thing, and now you're asking me to give you the one thing. So I set myself up for failure here at the end, I think. I would just say that there are best practices in the industry, that you don't have to go this alone, that there are industry resources, there are trade associations, there are companies like Hostess who provide leadership, and I think that's probably my one thing, is to reach out to your supplier base, reach out to your partners, even reach out to your competitors, and find out what best practices are in the industry. Keep an eye out as to what's going on. I'll tell you, Costco has RFID enabled all 1,800 doors at their depots across the United States. That's an indicator to me that that's a technology that we should keep an eye on, right? So be aware of what others are doing, and just know that you don't have to do this on your own, that there are resources to help.
Great. Rasma, would you like to share your thoughts?
I'm going to play off of John's comment about trade associations and that you're not alone. I think one of the roles that any trade organization serves is to provide a venue for that industry sector to come together, talk about best practices, talk about challenges, and to seek solutions. For purposes of traceability, I think there are a lot of opportunities to better educate the consumer, to look at things more globally. But I also think there's value to fully appreciating that we have to walk before we can run. So one step at a time.
Great. And Darryl?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to repeat them, because I do believe that in the industry that I'm part of, I think the trade associations play a critical role. They bring together so many diverse different opinions and really collate the information and make us better as manufacturers or whatever we're in. And so I always look to their thought processes, their thinking. I guess I would leave with three things that I always think about is speed, which I think we said is how do you get information through the value chain. I would say accuracy, to ensure that the information that is being transferred meets the needs of both the who you're sending it to or who you're getting it from. And then the last one would be content. And that's to make sure that the content is complete and comprehensive, such that the recipient or whoever can actually effectively use that. And traceability is around communication. So the better that we can do those elements, I think we as a total industry perform better and really continue to earn our consumers' trust.
Fantastic. Well, did someone want to add anything else, or? Okay. Well, I'd like to thank all of you again for your time. Rasma, John, Darryl, we really appreciate all of your insight and the thoughts and things you shared. If anybody in the audience has questions and would like to ask further questions, you can leave them in the comment box. We'll get them to the appropriate presenter and speaker, and they'll do their best to answer them. But on behalf of the FPSA's Packaging Network, I'd like to thank all of you for joining, and of course our panelists for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate your support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.